Hi everyone, and welcome to this Tinkershop tutorial. My name is Martin from the Innisfil Idea Lab and Library, and today we're going to be making a two-player game in MakeCode Arcade. So this is a little preview of the game we're making. Each player will be represented with a spaceship, and we have asteroids falling as well as energy crystals. And so the idea is you have to dodge the asteroids and collect the energy crystals to keep your energy meter up. If you run out of energy, then the game is over. So pretty simple but fun, and it's going to be a two-player game, so that should be a lot of fun. So if that sounds interesting to you, then let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is head over to makecode.com and then scroll down to Arcade. Click on that, and then click on New Project. Give our project a simple name. You can call it whatever you want, and click Create. And so the first thing we're going to want to do is just set a simple background image. So go into the Scene drawer and grab the Set Background Image block. Drag that into the On Start block, and then click the blank square to bring up the editor. And I'm just going to quickly make a simple space background, so we'll fill it in with black, and then we'll add in some white stars just using the pencil tool, and then do this like light purple to give it maybe a bit of depth. And then the same with the light blue. And again, you can create whatever background that you want. Feel free to pause the video and make a super awesome background, but that's good enough for me. So I'm going to click Done. And then when we refresh the simulator, we see our nice space background. Great. So the next thing we can do is add in our players. Alright, so to set up our players, we're going to go into the Sprites drawer and grab the Set My Sprite block. Drag that into the On Start, and then make sure you rename this sprite. Change the default from My Sprite to something more specific. So click New Variable, and we'll call this Player 1, and click OK. And then we'll need a second sprite for our player 2, and we'll do the same thing. Click New Variable, and we'll call this sprite Player 2. Now we can click on this blank square for player 1, and we'll just quickly draw a simple spaceship. So I'm going to try and be quick for this tutorial, but you can make yours look nicer. So we'll do that. That's good enough for me. So I'm going to click Done. And then for player 2, we basically want the same sprite. We'll just change it to a different color. So I can just copy this by clicking on the square and dragging it into the player 2 sprite block, and then go back in and use the paint fill tool, and we'll make player 2 purple there. So now we have our two characters on the screen, and we need to make them movable. So to do that, we go into the controller drawer, and then grab this Move Sprite with Buttons block, drag that in, and then for player 2, we'll have to use this block. So under the multiplayer category, there's a special player 2 move block. So we drag that under, and then we'll have to change these default values. So for this one, it's going to be player 1, so I'll select player 1, and for player 2, it's going to move our player 2 sprite. So now if I try on the screen, I should be able to move player 1 and player 2. And so the controls for player 1 are the A, S, W, D keys for left, down, top, right. And for player 2, it's the J, I, K, L keys. So you can both play on a keyboard that way, or you can also use a USB controller like an Xbox One controller works. And then for A and B for player 1, it's going to be the Q and E keys, and for player 2, it's going to be the U and O keys. We're not going to be using those in this game, but just want you to know that. So, if you remember in our preview, we actually just want these players to move left and right on the bottom of the screen. And also, I don't want them to be able to move off of the screen. So let's fix that first. Go into the Sprites drawer, and I think it's under Effects. Yeah. Grab the Stay in Screen block, and then change it to player 1, and click this On button. So now player 1 they must stay in the screen. Perfect. And we need to do the same thing for player 2, so I'll just right click and duplicate this and just change it to player 2. So now for player 2, if I'm moving around, I must stay in the screen as well. So that's great. And you'll notice our code gets a little bit larger with like a 2-player game, because for most things involving each player, we'll have to basically do the same thing for each player. So there's a lot of duplication. The next thing that we want to do is set our players to only move left and right, because right now they can still move up and down. And so if we click this plus button beside the move players block, we'll keep the VX, which is the left and right velocity, to 100, and set the VY to 0. So now for player 1, I should only be able to move left or right because the up-down velocity is set to 0. And so we just do the same thing for player 2, change the Y velocity to 0, and there we go. And then the final thing is we want our players, they can only move left and right now, but we want them to stick to the bottom of the screen. So we'll grab under the sprite drawer, grab the set position to block, and then we'll do this for player 1 first. We'll set position to, you can use the coordinate picker. I kind of already figured this out ahead of time, so I know that I want player 1 to be at 40 for an X value and a Y value of 110. So I plug in those values, and then when we restart, there are players down at the bottom there. And for player 2, we'll duplicate this block. Make sure we just change the sprite name to player 2, and the values for Y is going to be the same, but for X, we're going to change it to 120. That way, just when the program starts, each player will kind of start on each side of the screen. And there we go. They're correctly at the bottom of our screen, and we can move left and right. So I think that's everything we need for our players. The next thing we want to add is our energy meter. And there are some built-in things that we could use for that. For example, under info, there's lives. We could just use lives, but I think the energy meter is a little bit more interesting. So we're gonna do that, and it's not built in to the main MakeCode arcade block categories, but you can use an extension. So extensions are kind of just like unofficial add-ons that add additional functionality and give you some interesting sets of blocks to do some cool things. So if we go to extensions and scroll down, we want this status bar extension. So if you just click on that, it adds it to your available set of blocks. So it'll just take a second to load, and then you'll see that we now have this status bar drawer, and it has all sorts of interesting blocks for doing status bars. So this is what we'll use for our energy meter. So the first thing you want to do is go to the status bar drawer and grab this first block that sets a new status bar. So click on that, and I'm going to drag it to the bottom of our on start block. And you could rename it, but I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm going to change the kind. Instead of health, we'll make it energy. And that doesn't really matter, but it is more, we're calling it energy anyways, so let's go with that. And then you can set the height here. So the width is 20, the height is 4. You can see here it's appearing in the middle. I want to make it a little bit longer because I just think it's more fun. So I'm going to change it from 20 to 80. So, and that's a value of pixels. And we got a nice long energy bar there. And so the next thing we can do is change the color. So if you go to status bars, down to display, and then grab this set fill block. And then I think we'll just leave it to a green fill and a red background. So as this gets depleted, it'll show a red background. So that's pretty good. We could also add a label. If we go to status bar, set status bar label. So we can change that to say energy. And it's super obvious what that is. All right, and then we want to change the position. We don't want this to be right at in the middle. So we probably want it either on the top or at the bottom of our screen. So go back into status bars and grab the set status bar position block. And let's maybe put it at the bottom and see how that looks. There we go. It's right at the bottom. And then our players are just above it. So I think that's good. You can try it on the top too if you want. And then we also have to set our value. So, we can see it's full, but we need a numeric value. So if we go to value, we're gonna go drag the set value to block, and we're gonna set it to 100. So there we go. And so at the start of our game, we want to make sure that our status is set to 100. And then as the game goes on, the more it's going to go down a little bit every couple seconds, and our energy is also going to go down if we hit an obstacle, and then it will replenish a little bit if we grab one of the energy crystals. So let's go ahead and add our asteroids and our energy crystals. Okay, so to set this up, we're gonna grab an on-game update every 500 milliseconds block, drag it over here. And so we could make it pretty easy so that every 500 milliseconds, we just create a new asteroid and a new energy crystal. But that's gonna be, it might be a little bit too much, and I'd also like there to be maybe more asteroids falling than energy crystals, just to make it a little bit more difficult. So what we'll do instead is every 500 milliseconds, there'll be like a certain, like an 80% chance of an asteroid. So it'll still create a lot, but then we can say, you know, for the energy crystals, maybe there's only a 50% chance. And then we can play around with those values to kind of tune the difficulty of the game. So let's just build this out. Go into the logic drawer and then grab the if statement. We've covered if statements a lot in previous videos. Basically, as long as the condition that we put in here is met, it'll run the code. So to make that condition, go into the math drawer and then down to this block here where it says 0% chance. Drag that in, and remember we said we only want there to be like an 80% chance of an asteroid. So every 500 milliseconds, every half a second, there'll be an 80% chance of an asteroid. So let's go ahead and create that now. So go into the sprites drawer and grab a set my sprite block and drag that in. So we'll create the sprite. Let's rename it. So we'll rename it to Asteroid, and we'll give it a special kind. So change the kind here. We'll just create our new kind and we'll just call it Asteroid. And so we'll want to give it a different kind than our energy crystal, and that's why we did it that way. And then for the sprite, we just have to make an asteroid. I don't know, we'll do something with like the circle tool here. I don't know, something kind of random like this. And then we'll fill it in. I'll just make something really quick. So that's a good enough space rock for me, and we'll click done. And then the other thing we want to do is set the position of the asteroid. We want it to kind of come down from the top at a random X value. So we'll go into sprites and set my sprite position to, change this to our asteroid sprite, and then for the Y position, it'll just be 0 because that's right at the top of the screen. And then the X is going to be random. So to generate a random number, we go to math, find the pick random block and drag that into our X value. And the X coordinates go from basically 0 to 160. And we don't want them hanging off the edge at all, so we'll do it from like 5 to 155. And that should be good. And now we'll see it'll create them at the top here, but we need to make them fall down. So we can do that with velocity. So we go into our sprites drawer and then set my sprite velocity, drag that under the position block, and we want it just to fall straight down. So I also have to change this to our asteroid sprite, and then we don't want it moving side to side at all, so we'll set the VX to 0, and then the VY, the downward velocity, we could set this as a like one static number, but I'd like it if the asteroids were kind of falling down at different speeds. So I'll go back to the math drawer and grab another pick random number block, and we'll make it 20, pick random number between 20 and 50. And that way they'll be moving fairly slow. We don't want them to move too fast, but also some will be slower than others. And so there we go. We've got our asteroids falling. I think that's pretty good. The next thing we have to do is add our energy crystals. So actually what I'll do is just right click on this first if statement and duplicate it and just drag that under the first one. And then we have to change all these asteroid variables to a new variable, and we'll just call it crystal and click OK. And then just make sure all these are set to crystal, just like that. The position is going to be the same. The velocity, yeah, we'll leave that the same as well. So it'll be random. But I want there to be a slightly less chance of a crystal. So we'll make a crystal appear. It'll be only a 50% chance. So it's a little bit more rare. We have more asteroids. And then we have to change the actual sprite image. So I'll just delete the asteroid, and we'll make an energy crystal. Let's see. Just something like this. You can take time and make something that looks better, but that's good enough. So we'll click done, and so now if we restart this, we get crystals coming down, and they're also smaller, and asteroids. And so the next thing we'll have to do is set, the overlaps. If a player touches an asteroid, we'll want to remove some energy. If they get one of the energy crystals, we'll increase the energy. But the last thing that we want to do in this on-game update block, two things. We want to every half a second deplete some of the energy, because as our spacecrafts are flying around, they're going to deplete some energy. So let's do that. We'll go into the status bars drawer and grab this change status bar value by block, and we'll put that at the bottom of this on-game update block. And so every half a second, and you can play around with this, but I'm just going to say we'll remove 2 from our energy, and now you can see our energy slowly depletes. Okay, so and you can make it go faster or slower by changing this value. And the other thing we want to do is we'll add a score, so that it'll display the score at the end of the game when you've lost all your energy. And so the goal is kind of just to survive as long as possible and get the highest score. So to do that, we go into info, and then just grab this change score by block, and we'll set that to 5, so that every half a second the score will increase by 5. And so that's pretty good. The only thing now we have to do is control our overlaps. So what happens when we actually make contact with an asteroid versus a crystal, and then what happens when our energy is depleted. So we'll do that next. All right, so let's program the overlaps. The only thing I just realized I forgot was on our set crystal block, we need to change it. We need to change its kind from Asteroid to something unique. So we'll just add a new kind and we'll call it crystal. And this is going to be important because when we detect the overlaps, it's going to do it based on the various kinds of sprites. So we need these to be different because we want different things to happen with those overlaps. So we're going to go into the sprite drawer and then down to overlaps, and then just grab this on sprite of kind overlaps block and just drag it kind of to the bottom where you have some free space. And so first let's do the asteroids. So we're going to want this to run every time one of our player sprites overlaps another sprite of kind asteroid. And so when that happens, first we'll want to destroy the asteroid. So we'll go into sprites and then effects and grab this destroy my sprite block, drag that in, and so we're going to destroy the other sprite. So drag this other sprite block and replace my sprite, and then you can delete that, and then click this plus button and we'll just give it an effect. So let's do fire. And then when this happens, when we hit one of the asteroids we're trying to avoid, we're also going to deplete some of the energy. So go into the status bar drawer and grab this change status bar value block. And we'll change it by -10. So we want there to be a pretty big penalty for hitting an asteroid. And then let's just give that a quick try in the simulator. So yeah, that works. It depletes our energy fast and we get a nice effect. The other thing I want to do, just to make it more obvious that we've hit the asteroid, we're gonna do a camera shake. So I think that's under the scene category. Let's go to camera shake, down to camera and grab this camera shake, drag that in. We'll leave it at 4 pixels and half a second is good. So now when I hit an asteroid, it should move. Yeah, it shakes the camera and kind of makes that a little bit more obvious along with our fire effect. So that's great. Now we have to do our overlap for our energy crystal. So go into the sprites drawer and then back down to overlaps. We'll grab another overlap block. We'll maybe drag it over here. And so in this case, we wanted to detect when a player overlaps another sprite with the kind crystal. So when this happens, we also want to destroy the sprite. So we'll go into sprites, effects, and destroy my sprite. And then change that to our other sprite, which is going to be the crystal. Now, the reason we use other sprite is there's going to be a lot of crystals in our game, and we want to make sure it's specifically destroying the one we're overlapping here. So that's why we drag in the other sprite, and we'll also give this an effect. Let's do Starfield. So it'll destroy it, and then in this case, we want to increase our energy because we've gotten one of the energy crystals. So we'll go back into status bar, change status bar by, and we'll change it by a value of 5. So you get a little bit of an increase in energy, and you're more penalized if you hit an asteroid. And you can change these values to kind of tweak the difficulty of your game. And then the other thing we're going to want to do is maybe we'll increase our score a bit. So a little extra reward. So we'll go into info and then score, and then grab the change score block, and we'll increase it, we'll say by 2. You can make it kind of whatever you want to reward the player. So the last thing we're going to want to do is program what actually happens when we run out of energy. Okay, so this is like the last part of our game. And so to detect the value of our status bar, we're going to go into the status bars drawer and look for the on status bar 0 block. So that's this first one here. So, and remember our status bar, its kind is energy, so we need to change it from health to energy. So when our status bar, which is our energy, is 0, we're going to trigger game over. So go into the game over block, grab this game over, and lose. So now we can test this out. So we get energy by getting the crystals. And if we hit a bunch of asteroids, it's going to quickly deplete our energy. And all right, there we go. It's really loud, but we get game over. It shows us our score, and then we can try again and get a better score every time. Okay, so one last thing that I do want to mention is if you can't remember the controls for 1-player and 2-player, you can click this little keyboard icon underneath the simulator, and this will just show you all the controls for player 1 and player 2. And of course, this is if you're playing sharing a keyboard, but if you have like an Xbox One controller or possibly another type of controller that's capable of connecting to your computer, you can use those as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. Hope you enjoyed learning about making 2-player games and the status bar extension. I hope you learned something, and most importantly, I hope you have a great day. Thanks.